What is going on, everybody? We are back with potentially one of our final podcasts of the season. I'm your host, as always, PJ Thomas, joined here by one of my fantastic co-hosts, Mr. Dan Ruggiero. Dan, if you want to give a hello to everybody.
Yeah, it's good to be back. We missed the All-Star draft. I think I was here the week before that, but we were even saying it. It's been kind of back and forth, shoddy a couple of weeks. We've all got lives to live. We've all got things that come up in the way. So I'm glad that I can be back for this preview of one of the best weeks of the year for the Legacy Leagues.
Awesome. So, we can get right into it. I know we don't typically recap too much on this podcast anymore, but with the semifinals and the finals being these 2 weeks, I think it's a little bit important that we kind of recap before we go into our predictions for the last week. So, Danny, why don't you start us off with a little bit of a recap from both games, kind of what you saw from the outside, and what you think we can expect going into Tuesday night?
Yeah, so I'll start with I'm going to pull up the hub while I'm talking just so we can look at the scores, look at the box scores while everything's going on. But I'll start with that first game of the night, the Lob City and Game Breakers game. I even said it to you guys in the group chat after that game ended. The final score was 79-71. It looks like it's closer than it was. I mean, for points of the game, it was closer than it was, but I think there was that garbage time three with 5 seconds left by Gian that made it that 8-point final score. It's really more of a 10, 11 point margin from Lob, no matter how you slice it. But I said it when I was setting the lines. I've said it to you. You can't not bet on Lob City in the playoffs. I don't care that it's the Game Breakers had the edge. They had won the 2 regular season matchups pretty handedly. But it's I said it, they're clicking at the right time. And it's tough that if you look at the potential finals matchups you could have had, I think as a fan of the league or a follower or whatever, or a player, you want to see a matchup that doesn't include Lob. And that's no shot at Lob. You just know that they've won 7 of 8 championships. And you want to, I think the league is great because Lob is great, but I think that the league is at a peak when teams other than Lob are in the hunt. So, we can slice it. I want to hear just a quick one-shot thought from you, and then we can get in kind of stats and talk a little bit more about storylines from the game. But it's always Lob City's time to shine when the lights are brightest, and that's how it's always been, and that's how it continues to be.
Yeah, it's nothing different. I think the big thing that we saw this week was experience and playoff experience as Danny takes a sip of his mimosa. I think playoff experience was something that was really important this week. The 2 newer teams to the league were the teams that weren't able to get it done. And, and that's not something that is too, I think the only time that a team that teams that haven't had that playoff experience have made it to the finals was the year that Lob City didn't win and they didn't even get there. It was us and the Good U, who I believe it was their first or second year in the league. So it's playoff experience is kind of what won these games. I think these teams know how to win in crunch time. I think this will be a good matchup, but unfortunately, I think for the league, it's not super exciting when Lob City's in it. Even with Halfway being a great team this year, we always said from the beginning they were going to be a team that was in the hunt. They're a well-rounded team, a lot of good players on that team. But again, this is going to be a game that comes down to experience. And I think Halfway's only made 1 or 2 championship experiences against Lob. And they haven't come out on top in any of those. And Lob has been in all but 1 championship and won all of them that they've been in. So do you foresee the championship winning experience playing a role in this game? And if so, how big?
I think it absolutely plays a factor. If it's your team that's won 7 championships, experience can't not play a role. We saw it. I think the entire regular season Game Breakers were the better team. And there were points where they had made runs. They got it down within 5 points. They were making it look interesting. And these are 2 teams that know how to play that fast-paced run and gun style of basketball where they're just going to be going back and forth all game. And when it came down to it, I think what's really telling for Lob City is the fact that Jose put up 30 points. He shot 1 for 14 from 3, and they were still able to feel as dominant, as in hold of control of the game as they were. It's like there were points where the game breakers would go on runs and bring it in within a couple points and make you question who was going to walk out of this game with the win. But there was never a time where it felt like Lob had to like prove themselves, I guess. And I want to get your thoughts on this because we talked about this. I think you talked about it in the All-Star game draft. At what point, and I love Gian, he's great. He's a good guest on the podcast. He's a great player. At what point do we ask that he has an issue getting it done in the playoffs? Because last year it was against Lob that he lost in the semifinals, and him and Hachi combined for, I think he was like, said it was like 80 of their 90 points or something like that.
It was like 72 of their 70 of their 80 points or something.
Yeah,
like
something crazy like that. But you come back with a much better team this year, and a team that has beat Lob City in different variations twice this year, fairly handedly, and you still can't get it done. I love him. He's a great player. I think that if he got a championship, like that would really like cement a status for him. I think he's already cemented a status as a tier 1 guy through the entire history of the league. But at what point do you question his ability to get it done in the playoffs?
Yeah, when I was talking to Nuri after their game, he brought up a good point. And this is, again, no shade. We love Gian. He's a great dude. I mean, I text him almost every day just about basketball stuff, and he's just a really cool guy, and we love having him. But Nuri said something. He was like, yeah, Gian a lot of the times will talk about, or that whole team will talk about how if they had Charles Correa that game, it might be a different story. And, him and Hachi combined for X amount of points. But Nuri said, bringing somebody on, unless it's somebody like a Jose or whatever, who's just your all around best player, right? That doesn't necessarily add 20 points to their box score. It just spreads the points out a little bit differently. So, and that's a good insight. And, you look at it where Gian probably had him and Hachi and Charles when he was there last year, and not much else helped. And this year he had a ton of help, really. But to the extent of it appeared to me, it was very evident in the playoffs that they had about 4 guys that they could trust. And that's no shade to the guys on the game breakers bench. We're usually in that position ourselves. When we won the championship, our main guys were the guys that were out on the court. And, the bench guys didn't play much. And you can get it done with 4 guys, but it's a lot harder when Lob has a 7-man deep bench and they can throw in anybody. And anybody can give you buckets and do what they have to do. So, it's tricky. It's a tricky balance. But I think now you begin to question, okay, even with the supporting cast, Gian wasn't able to get it done. How much more help does he need? And can he get it done in this league and beat a juggernaut team like a Lob City? I mean, we saw them beat everybody else except for the Warriors, who were essentially a 2-man team, right? And, we saw the supporting cast wasn't able to get it done for the Warriors this week. But, you're right. I don't know at what point we start to question, is Gian a playoff guy? Does he shrink a little bit when the lights get a little bright? And again, that's no shade to him. That's just been the history of this so far in our small sample size. And I would love for him to make a deep run and get to the finals. But until they're able to do that, at what point do you say, well, he just hasn't gotten it done yet in the playoffs? And I think you can start to question that now. I wouldn't say that he's officially saying, oh, he can't get it done. I don't think that it's close to that. But, that would be a thought that would start going through my head for sure. And I'm sure it's gone through their heads is, can Gian be the one on a team to get it done? And so far he hasn't been able to, but that doesn't mean that he can't.
I think it's a matter of if/when they come back for the next season, whatever pieces they have. I mean, you take it and see how he grows from a situation like this. What I think plays a factor, because you're talking about supporting cast, I think it's something that I want to shine light on, not for lack of a better term, disappearance, but the only term I can really use is the disappearance of Hachi Amini in the semifinals. He went from, granted it was against the game breakers, he had almost a quadruple double in the quarterfinals. He had like 37 points and I think 7 rebounds, 7 assists, 7 steals. He had arguably one of the best playoff performances of recent memory. And he follows that up, I think, with only 7 points this week. And I mean, obviously, he's a guy that we've talked before where we say in this setting on this team, he's a quote unquote role player. We know that he could be a 1 or a 2 on another team. And we know Gian said on the draft that he believes Hachi is the best point guard in the league. And I know that you and Shane took a little issue to that statement. I mean, for reasons that we won't get into right now, but it puts that statement into light that he is a great player, but it like more so compared to Gian, because Gian still had a decent game. He was still doing what he could to try to make something happen. Hachi just flat out didn't show up, I don't think. And I'm not going to put it as a knock on him, but it's just in a big moment like that where you've played well against this team in the past. That is not the performance as a number 2, number 3 guy that you need to give in the semifinals.
No, and you know, Shane and I were saying when we were there watching the game that they relied on him a little too heavily, we think, in the last moments of that game. There were probably 3 or 4 possessions when it was a 10-point game that, you know, with like 4 minutes left, that they came down and they just let Hachi let it fly from 3, and none of them were dropping in. And we were like, at this point, you got to get it to somebody else because you got to get it to somebody who's going to hit the shots. And, you know, I mean, they were good shots. They weren't the best shots, but they relied on him as their guy in those crunch times. And I almost would have liked to see the ball in Gian or Joe's hand in those last 4 minutes. But they really, really kind of forced it to Hachi and let him go. And I know they trust him, and that's great. But there's a switch that guys can turn it on in the playoffs and get to that extra gear. And I was a little upset that we didn't see that from him. I know, and I'm gonna talk about him because I just have seen it. Like, we saw that switch kind of get flipped for Brian the year that we went to the finals without Johnny and Vinny, and Brian had to be the guy, and he had like a 30-something point game and really kept us within 1 point for a majority of that game until the last 5 minutes. So I mean, you know, you got to see guys that have that switch, that in those moments where they have to step up and be the guy because Gian and Joe are getting everybody's best defenders, you know, he's got to be a guy that can do that.
I mean, yeah, I mean, we won't dwell on it too long, but I think it's the same thing that I said with Gian. It's a matter of if when these guys come back next year, you see how they retool and prepare for these situations, and you just like hope that when you find yourself in this spot again, you know that you've been here before and you know what you did wrong and you know what you need to do to correct it. I think that's the simplest answer that you can give. I mean, if there's any other comments you have on it, we can dwell on this game a little more, but if not, we'll get into the other side of this matchup before we.
Yeah, no, I mean, to talk about disappearance, I think we got to get to Charles. I mean, I think that I don't know if you have the box score pulled up, but from what I watched, he was Halfway did an unreal job, and we do have to credit Jeff. Jeff gave him a really, really, really hard time this game. But for lack of a better term, he really disappeared for them. I mean, that was their guy. Marvin, I thought, had a great game. And Charles knew that it was going to have to be a supporting cast kind of night because he was going to draw doubles. And, you know, we saw a lot of Spence and Jeff double teams on Charles. And credit to Halfway Crooks, they played a really great defensive game. And I think this was one of the best games I've seen from Spence all year, and he needed to have that game. We said that he was going to be the X factor. But I think the Warriors would have been a little bit happier if Charles was able to give them a little bit more. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think you said it best. I mean, I will argue with the term disappeared, because I had said it like in passing in the group chat we have with Joey and Shane. And Joey was very adamant about making sure that we knew it was defense from the Halfway Crooks that led to that performance from Charles and from the Warriors in total, and not just a disappearance. Because you have, granted, they played against a team of 3 guys in the quarterfinals in Ball Don't Lie, but you had your top 3 scorers in Charles, Aiden, and Robert Braxton. And it was 55 points, 30-something points, and 20-something points. And I think this week, all 3 of them had 15 points. So it was, I mean, granted, you have the extra defender on the floor, not saying that having 3 guys as your defensive matchups doesn't play a role into things, but you took 3 guys that were really able to get stuff going in the quarterfinals and really contained them. And I think it's a credit to Jeff. He's been playing like a defensive player of the year all year. I would be very shocked. I mean, we said that we have a pick that we think could have made a case for defensive player of the year, but I'd be very shocked if Jeff doesn't repeat this year. You even said it, Spence, as great as he played offensively, I literally think his defense was the biggest part of his game the other night. It's like 5 days ago. And I mean, it's a thing where I said, like, we needed the two stars of Halfway in Dev and Dom to kind of outpace Charles and Marvin. And I really think they did that. I mean, the entire team couldn't miss. I texted Spence after the game. I've never seen him make 2 threes in a game, and let alone he goes 3 for 3. They packed the gym. They had the energy, the intensity, the effort was just all on their side the entire game. And I think outside of the 2 early threes that Robert Braxton hit after the tip off, it was all Halfway all night.
Yeah, and we don't need to stay on this game too much. It was pretty dominant from tip to buzzer, really. The Halfway Crooks this whole game. And so my next question to you, Danny, and I want to hear your thoughts on this because you know these teams just as well as anybody else, right? So you can really talk about this, but is one, the defense of the Halfway Crooks, which has been their identity all year, is the defense of the Halfway Crooks going to be able to contain Jose, Colin Burns, and Carl this game? I mean, we saw Jose still put up a 30-point performance, even shooting 1 for 14 from 3, right? So he was still able to get whatever he wanted inside. 27 of his points coming from inside the arc, right? And then the other question is, because I think everyone in their head is saying Lob has to be the favorite in this game, regardless of, I know they're at one stop ahead in the standings, but, I think Lob is the favorite clearly here just because of their history. It's the same team that's won so many championships, and can the offense of the Halfway Crooks match the offense of Lob? And I don't know the answer to either one of those. I think the defensive Lob can keep up with the offensive Halfway. It's going to be a game that it's Lob's game to lose, in my opinion. And it's a matter of, do you honestly think that the defense and offense of the Halfway Crooks can keep pace with the fast pace, down your throat offense and defense that Lob City plays?
So I had tweeted it from the Low Post Twitter when the first game ended and Lob City won. I know they're the 3 seed. I know the 1 seed was still in the hunt before tip off of that 1-4 matchup that ended up with the Halfway Crooks getting the upset. I think regardless of who won that game, Lob City was going to be the odds-on favorite. And I have the spread. I calculated everything out. We can talk about it at the end of the show. But I do think Lob is the favorite. And it's a matter of experience. It's a matter of explosiveness. But what I think plays a role in this, because you were saying, will the Halfway Crooks defense be able to contain the Lob City offense? I think the return of Carl Lee throws a wrench into things for the Halfway Crooks. I mean, Joey even said it on the post-game show. They were all operating under the impression that Carl, whatever injury it was that he had, was going to be a multi-week thing, that they weren't expecting him to show up. At least the Halfway Crooks weren't expecting him to show up against the Game Breakers. But he looked fine. He looked healthy. So I don't know if it was mental warfare. I don't know if it was just underestimation of how long it was going to take. I don't know if it was just him playing through pain and playing fairly well. But him being there definitely changes things for the Halfway Crooks. But I do think that you were saying Jose scored 30 points and shot 1 for 14 from 3. I definitely think there's a bit of a size advantage when you look at the Halfway Crooks versus the Game Breakers, that who has that ability to meet him at the rim and prevent him from just kind of having his way within that kind of like restricted area zone. Looking back at the history of this, because I was going through yesterday trying to just crunch some numbers. I think I don't have the numbers on Lob City against the Werewolves, but as far as the remaining teams in the league, the Halfway Crooks have the most experience against Lob City. I know the Werewolves had a little bit more playoff success in their years, where even though they missed this season, they got Lob City in the finals twice. So they might still have the edge in most games played against Lob City. But Halfway Crooks, I think it's 9 times they have faced Lob City in 8 seasons. One of those matchups came in the playoffs in summer 2018, and they lost. The other 8 matchups all came in the regular season, and they lost every single one of them. So the Halfway Crooks are 0-9 in their existence as a franchise against Lob City. But the closest loss that they had came this year. They lost 72-71 in the regular season. I think it was week 5. So it's definitely they've played enough where they know these guys and they know their style. They finally have some pieces where they can try to keep everything contained a little bit. There were a handful of pieces missing from both sides in that regular season matchup this year that I don't really think you could put an asterisk next to it, because it's like, I think Colin was out for Lob on the injury report, and I think Jeff wasn't there for Halfway. So like, you can 6 in one, half dozen in the other. So their defense this year has looked like on the right night, they might be able to keep them in check. It's just a matter of, will Halfway's offense be able to complement their defense? And I can pull up some stats from the game earlier this season. I can pull up some playoff stats for everyone, but I want to hear your kind of rebuttal to this whole soapbox that I've been getting on, and we can build from there.
I don't know if I have a rebuttal, because I think that's been, like I said, the identity for Halfway this year is their defense. I think you need another game from Spence if he has another gear. You need another gear from him. And if he can't give you that next gear, I don't foresee this being an upset. This wouldn't be the greatest upset in the world, I think, if they were to win this, because I think they're a very good team. Like, I wouldn't be extremely surprised to see a Halfway championship, but I think it's unlikely. I just don't know if offensively Halfway is going to be able to keep pace. I think defensively they could be just fine, but at some point Halfway is going to have to go on a run in this game. And I don't know when that run is going to come, because Lob City does a pretty good job of not allowing big runs from other teams. Don Langston's been doing his thing, 20 points a game. That's what we expected to see from him. You know, Jared Hansen had a really big game, 4 for 8 from 3. As you said, Spence, they have him. Oh, this is not in there.
Yeah, so this is their matchup from the regular season.
Yeah, I mean, both teams shot the exact same from 3, essentially percentage wise. But even so can you actually scroll up just so I can see who was present for? So yeah, we see no Jeff Winchell. We do see Dev there. But Jose, scroll down. Jose shot excellent from 3 this game, 8 of 18, and then had 41 points. So was still able to get it done. But only 7 of Jose. So Jose had more buckets and points from outside the arc in this game they did inside without Jeff. So with Jeff there, that could potentially force Jose to be more of a jump shooter, which this is the only game this year that we've seen him be able to really efficiently do that. But I think,
and I think actually, not to cut you off for a second, I'll let you continue. I think, funny enough, this might have been the game do you remember there was a game in the regular season he shot 1 for 15, and we were like clowning about Jose shooting from 3, and I think this is the game he followed up after that performance.
Yeah, you know, and if you're Halfway, if you lose this game because Jose hit 8 threes and shot 44%, are you living with that? And I think you do. I think if you're Halfway, you live with the loss if Jose beats you from 3.
I think it's a game where you need to let everyone beat you from 3, because
that's before,
we've talked before how, like, if you're a guard in a 10-foot league, you might suddenly be a big man in the legacy leagues. But these guys they both have players on either side of the floor that are big guys, and they can do most of their damage inside. So I think if you have the defensive matchup where you can kind of prevent Lob from doing what they do best, you need to do that, and that needs to be your focus. So I think it comes down to make Jose beat you from 3, make Cody have a turn back the clock game, try to keep, if Colin is there, keep him from doing what he does. If Carl is even anywhere from 80 to 90% what he was in the regular season, keep him from the rim. It's just like, that's got to be the mantra for the Halfway Crooks. But I want to know, what do you think the game plan should be for Lob City? I know we're saying that they come in with 7 rings, they're probably the favorite. I don't want to shy away from thinking they don't have to game plan. What does a successful plan of stopping this year's Halfway Crooks team look like for them?
So I think you have to limit what Jeff and Dev do underneath, and I think that they have the bodies to be able to do that in Jose and Carl. I actually do though think that for Halfway, this could be the first game, and maybe I'm wrong in saying that this would be the first time we've seen this from them this year. If I'm Halfway with Jeff and Dev, I'm going to zone this game and making Lob shoot the ball. I would leave everybody and their brother wide open from the corners, and I would say to Dev and Jeff, you got to lock down these blocks all night. And is that a game plan where if it works can be something that allows Halfway to beat Lob? I think so. I think seeing a 2-2 zone from them would not be unheard of at some point in this game. You don't have to stick to it the whole game, but I would like to see them go to it at some point. If Lob's getting what they want inside early, don't be surprised if we see Halfway go to it some sort of a zone with Jeff and Devin down low.
And I think not to be looked over is we've really got to watch foul trouble, especially on Jose. I was looking at the numbers, kind of like figuring out, because on the website, and this is another like thing that I've noticed, on the website, the like stats for the year for both players and teams only considers the regular season. So I had to just go through, look at the box scores for playoff games and figure out how everyone's just been doing just in the playoffs. And Jose is the only guy in the league that has taken double-digit free throws. And he's also the only guy in the league for the playoffs who has made double-digit free throws. I think he's shooting upwards of 90% from the free throw line in these playoffs. And he has a fairly decent sample size. So I think for Halfway, it's not only just a keep him from the paint, it's also a keep him from the line. And I think Lob City is also the best free throw shooting team in the playoffs this year so far.
Yeah, for Lob, I think I think their game plan needs to be to attack the rim and do what they do best, even with those two big guys down low, because Halfway is going to have to play aggressive this game. And if you can get Jeff or Devin into foul trouble early, that's going to be a big swing for Lob. And I think they just need to go for it. They need to go drive the ball inside, let Carl and Jose do their thing. And if your external guys like Cody and Greg, not Greg, and Josh and all those guys can hit those shots, then you're talking a game that should handily be in Lob City's favor. But I think they're going to have to attack the paint and make those guys foul them. What are your thoughts on that?
I think, yeah, that's another good point that you bring up, especially with if Halfway gets into foul trouble, they're kind of shit out of luck, for lack of a better term. And I think if Lob gets into foul trouble, it's a matter of, can those guys like a Josh Smith, like a Justin Tabas step up? Which I will say, it doesn't show up in the box score. Josh Smith has been excellent defensively this year. And especially in the last game against the Game Breakers, I know he posted it on social media where he had blocked Joe at the rim and it went off of his head. So I want to give him a shout out because he's been fantastic all year. I don't want to like give away too much, but he did get an all defensive vote from me. But yeah, it falls down to, as much as we want to talk about the stars on each team, it falls down to supporting cast, I think, as well. It's a matter of who can play the most complete game from a complete team. On Halfway's end, we've talked all year about how they've never really had the one guy. And even still, like, they got two all-stars in Dom Langston and Dev Pina. But I really think that we were selling that team short at just those two all-stars, because I think there's four guys that really made a case for being all-stars. And if you had to pick two, it's really tough to figure out who those guys are going to be. So I think as much as it is have one of those four, whether it be Jeff, Spence, Dom, or Devin, having a big game, you need to have everybody else showing up. And I think we did it when we were in the finals. We really wanted to make sure everybody got their minutes. Everybody recorded a stat of some kind. I think Joey Zacco could play a role in this. I mean, I know he's always said when they went to triple overtime in Connecticut, he was like, it's bad when you know that I'm playing in triple overtime. And I know that in the quarterfinals, he went 1 for 14 from three and 1 for 16 from the field. But like, he's a guy that could be a difference maker. Mike Wilbur is another guy who could be a difference maker. So it's like, what are you going to expect from everybody else, Pete?
No, and that's been the narrative all year is the supporting cast. And we saw that with us. We saw that with a lot of teams is that the supporting cast can't get it done when your top guys don't have it. It's not going to be an easy night. And, to get into the spread of this, because we're talking about Lob City being the favorites, what do you have for us for this game, Danny?
See, I'm pulling it up right now. I'm not going to show you all of the math from it. I'm not going to show you everything, but
Can't reveal the 11 or
based off of this year alone, not the past, because just to give you a little bit more weighting, I want to go through and read the final scores of those 9 losses that the Halfway Crooks have at the hands of Lob City. I'm going to start from fall 17 and I'm going to work my way to now. 110 to 56, 99 to 57, 82 to 63, 81 to 52. You get the point. We have gone from almost at least a 60-point win for Lob to just a 1-point win this year. And with how the offenses have been playing, with how the defenses have been playing this year, the line for the finals is going to open up at Lob City -2 points. So that's where we are now. I might get even more full card. We could get like an over-under. We could get other prop bets going. We can get a full thing for the finals. But -2 points, where are you leaning right now, Pete?
I'm gonna lean in the direction of Lob City, because I was proven wrong in the Lob City game this week, and that I think experience is what won them that game, and experience is what won the Halfway Crooks this game. And if we're gonna go on experience, if we think the teams are relatively even, I'm gonna go with Lob City here just for that. And I don't necessarily. I think it's a good line. I think it's going to be a close game. It's going to be a really good game. I'm going to be excited to be there, and I'm going to be commentating on the game on the sidelines with the speaker and all that jazz. We got that going on, so I'll be there. But I'm going to lean in the direction of Lob City this week, just for that reason alone. And then I want to hear what your thoughts are.
I think as far as the spread goes, I think it's a safer play to say that Lob is going to win by at least 2. Because I mean, knowing my history, I do all this math. I figure out what these lines are going to be. And some weeks it's great. Some weeks I'm just completely missing the mark. So like knowing me, I'm going to say it's Lob -2 and someone's going to win by like 15 points. I mean, I had said last week it was going to be 4.5 in favor of the Game Breakers and they lose by 8. So I think initially, if you're going to open the line, I think you have to favor Lob. But if you're going to sprinkle a money line bet out there, I'd sprinkle a few bucks on the Halfway Crooks. Because I think on the right night, maybe it can happen. And as much as the Game Breakers had success against Lob City in the regular season, I think in the playoffs, when the game slows down and you really need to rely on sound defense as well as sound offense, the Halfway Crooks, I can't believe I'm even saying this. The Halfway Crooks are the team this year that I think has the best chance to take Lob City down in the playoffs. I want to know who you think is going to who's going to be the X factor for this game, Pete.
Spence. I think it's Spence. I said it last game. I think it's going to be Spence this game. You need him to be. If he's not,
as we're reading the messages that Shane won't be able to join us this week.
That's okay. I think it's going to have to be Spence, and I think if he can put on another performance like he did this most recent week, then I think they have a chance. But that's where my head's at, is leaning that way. Now, I want to hear what your thoughts are. Let's hypothetically say Halfway does win this game. What does this mean for the league? What does this mean for Lob City if Halfway gets his championship?
So I think when we won a few years ago, it was a big deal because nobody other than Lob had won it. So it kind of proved to people like, hey, you can play in this league and be competitive, and a team that's not the same team from the last 4 years can win a championship. And then I think everybody kind of put the asterisks because they were like, hey, Lob City wasn't in that finals. And then it became a matter of, okay, now we need to find the team that can beat Lob City at their own game. And we haven't had that yet in this is the third season since that championship because we had a little delay with COVID. We haven't had a team that's able to take Lob City to the finals and beat them at their own game. So I think if you do get halfway to win against a Lob City team that is clicking at the right time, it's not that it questions the future of the league, but I think it opens a door where you can now say, hey, look, these guys, like, you made God bleed. And if you can make God bleed, then people will cease to believe he exists. So I think it gives people an added intensity, an added X factor to try to come back next year and be like, hey, these guys did it. I think we're better than these guys. Why don't we go out there and see if we can do it? I think it adds a chip to the game breaker's shoulder because they beat both of these teams fairly considerably in the regular season. And it makes that team maybe say, hey, we're going to come back next year and we're going to show people that we're the real deal. A team like the Duyes boys who had that success for years, and this year, due to people having lives and not being able to play this year, they took a step back and they were back to that bottom of the barrel team that we saw from us in our very first season. And it gets a team like the Duyes boys to say, hey, let's try to rebuild and reload and come back as strong as we were 4 years ago and see if we can do this again and we can knock someone off the top. And maybe with all the clout that the league has been getting on social media, you see guys from the area that hadn't considered playing in the league before saying, well, if it's not just going to be the same 7 or 8 guys that are going to get a ring every year, I'm going to at least try to make an effort. So it does a lot of good for the league. And I've said, the league is always best when its best teams historically are performing well. But I think the league will be even better when we have more teams that can say they've been a legacy leagues champion.
Yeah, and it's a different story in Connecticut. A bunch of teams have won over there. So I think this is really it is now. What does this game mean for a Lob City loss? Like, to them, what does it mean for them to win this game on the flip side of all this?
Honestly, when you look at it, yes, if you're any team that's in the playoffs, you want to win a championship. And I think Lob City obviously wants to win the championship. I don't think it's a situation like a Boom Shakalaka, which I'll get to them at the end. We can talk about what I was doing on Twitter this week. It's not like a situation like them or like the Ozone Boys where one playoff loss defines them as a franchise and they disband and never come back. I think if Lob City loses the finals this year, they live. They come back next season, whether it's winter or summer, whichever one, and they come back ready to try to win another one. It's not a matter of what they will, because I think you even said it. You've talked with guys on Lob, and I don't know if it's they want to be beaten, but they want competition. Like you said, I'll let you talk about it, the conversation you had with a few of their guys, but it's it's not fun when you can just steamroll everyone. I think Lob City wants a challenge, and I don't think losing will demoralize them, but it will make them more excited, I think, if they have more competition.
Yeah, when I was talking to Cody, he had mentioned the league was so much fun when we had our big three of Johnny, Vinny, and Zach with us because we were the team that was giving them the trouble. Every regular season matchup and for 2 seasons we had beaten them. And we unfortunately lost that finals, but even they said that they wished that finals game Johnny and Vinny had been there for, because that would have been a fun game. That would have been really fun for them, no matter what the outcome is. And, they just expressed to me that the league is more fun when we have guys like that. When we were competitive, it was fun for them. Jose even said the year that, and I want you to get to Boom after I say this, because this is what I'm talking about. Jose said, the year that you guys beat me in the playoffs and we were undefeated, the 1 seed, that was it was a fun run to watch, even though he wasn't a part of that. And he was the one that got eliminated, and they were the Goliath and we were the David that year, and so I think you're right. I think they do want that level of let these 2 teams go at it with each other. And And that's the finals matchup you want to see. Get to what you were going to say about Boom before we kind of wrap up here.
Well, so I'll rope another thing around about the Halfway Crooks before I rope around about Boom, because it kind of all ties in to each other. The caveat that I'll give to the Halfway is 0-9 against Lob City is that Lob City in their entire existence of this league has relatively been the same core guys, where it's like the Cody, the Vic, Nuri's been there for now a good handful of years. Colin's been there for a handful of years. It's been relatively the same cast the entire time. Whereas Halfway throughout the years, they've always kind of been evolving. They've always been a little different, whether it's Joey and Jared have always been there, but you had a guy like Dylan Lincoln. You had a guy like John Sline when they were running the Twin Towers kind of setup. But then you get into the years where Halfway was so bad that they forfeited the first round of the playoffs, and they just did not have a good year. Nobody showed up. And after that, you had a really weird year where after Boom disbanded, you had guys like Mark Belville and Brandon Sweeney wearing purple. And it just, over the years, it's just been a lot of different looks for the Halfway Crooks, to give a little rhyme. But to rope in the next point, as Joey calls it, a transition, Mark Belville tweeted after the semifinals, longtime Boom Shakalaka guard. He said, regardless of how many teams you add, it's always the OGs that come through in the clutch. And he gave his flowers to Lob City and the Halfway Crooks for making the finals. And I tweeted hashtag bring back Boom. And Mark even made the point to mention that they are second all time in wins as a franchise, even though they haven't played since summer 2019. And there's a lot of teams that I miss, Boom Shakalaka being one, the Werewolves being another. We said the league is better.
Led swish kebabs.
We said the league is better when there are more competitive teams, and those two are some competitive teams from the past that I want to see again. And I think with this new found fame, popularity of the league, I really want to see some of those old teams come back. I really want to see.
Who are some other teams that you would, because it's going to kill me to say this, but I miss the rivalry with the Ozone Boys. I do.
The Ozone Boys were that. So even though we lost that regular season game against the Ozone Boys in summer 2019 was probably.
Well, I'm glad we lost because it put us in the position to win that finals.
Because I think it worked out where if we had won that game, we might have been like the 5 seed or something
rather
like that.
Than the 9. Yes.
But just something about that game, like that first year of the Ozone Boys, they were, because we say like we were the team that trash talks. Really, it was just Shane trash talking and everyone else kind of falling in line underneath that. They were the only team, I think, aside from Lob, that really had an answer to the trash talk, maybe not the basketball, but to the trash talk. And I just remember, I don't know if I even played in that game, but just sitting there because we were like, oh, the Hogan twins are on vacation. They're not coming. This will be like easy money. And they were keeping it tight the entire game. The demoralization that I had on that bench when they run through with 5 minutes left in the fourth quarter, throw on their jerseys and check into the game. It was a game that we lost, but it is a game that minute for minute I remember, and it was intense. And I wish that we were doing live streams back then, because I would go back and watch that game if I could.
Yeah, Joey goes back and does the archives. Like, what was that, Boy Bowl 2?
That was Boy Bowl 1. That was the first time we ever played. But the Ozone Boys were a team, right? Yeah, there were 3, I think.
3 Boy Bowls.
They were a team that I would love to see back. Good U. We beat them in the finals, and then they took
down Lob in the semis.
They took down Lob in the semis, and then they came back and they brought Randy Butler in, who Randy Butler was a long time guy from this league. Yeah. They're a team I'd like to see back. Boom Shakalaka and the Werewolves.
Missing the big one.
Yeah, they're number 1 and number 2 of the teams I would love to see back in the league. And I know that life gets in the way. We've all got jobs. You might not have the facilities to come back next season.
we're missing our other big rival. So the Ozone Boys were probably our 1B rival. We're missing our biggest rival in the Duyes Boys Legacy League's entirety in the Werewolves, and I would love to see them back. That has been probably, in my opinion, I don't know if there's a better rivalry in the entirety of Legacy Leagues than the Duyes Boys and Werewolves. I mean, that was the Red Sox and Yankees rivalry of just, respect, but I want to kill the guys across the court from me. And
it's
I
a matter of,
love
I don't care how good of friends I am with you. As
Right.
soon as that ball goes up in the air for 40 minutes, you're my worst enemy. And we were two teams that were talking sweet on Twitter the whole time. That's another thing that I think will make the league a lot better. Lob has a social media presence. I don't think they utilize it to the fullest extent. I think we need to make sure that more teams are utilizing social media the way that we did when we were at our peak. Obviously, the Duyes Boys took a step back on Twitter and Instagram this year, just solely because there wasn't so much good to report. But I think the league is best when there are more teams in contention at the top and when there's more teams that are firing up a presence online. And I think that's why the Werewolves rivalry was as big as it was. And I just think about how many more rivalries, memories, core moments you could have for this league if more teams were active the way that we were back then.
Yeah, and I always tell Joey, if there's a Legacy League social media Hall of Fame award, we should be the first inductees into that, and I think we came out really hot in our first season, and even though we weren't great, we continued that, and that was really fun for the league. I mean, if you remember our championship, we had that gym absolutely packed to the brim with people.
I haven't seen it that packed until Tuesday night last week. It was I wish I was there.
We were so present on social media. We had the Connecticut League talking about us that year,
We had people driving up from Connecticut to watch the game.
Yeah.
But it's a matter of, I wish I was at
shout out our boys from Connecticut, Evan Wheaton and
Greg Horn.
Greg Horn, OGs, man.
I wish I was at the semis this week because that is the most fun, packed atmosphere I've seen for this league since 4 years ago. And I think that we need to keep that going. I mean, even Spence, we had guys on social media after Spence gave his interview. They were saying, hey, this guy brought the honeys with him. So
his mom and sister. Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, it's a fun time. It's a fun week. I can't wait to see what the next season is like, whether it's the winter or the summer. I'm not going to confirm. I don't know anything. Maybe I do, maybe I don't, but I'm not going to say anything. But yeah, Lob City -2. I'll get the graphic going, make your picks. And
we're going to hold line. We'll do some player props, all that jazz too.
And we'll see where the game goes, and we'll see how
we might be able to give Spence 1.5 threes this week.
We might have to after that performance last week.
So, I mean, as we're going to keep it relatively short today. There's not too much to touch on. I think we've touched on the fun stuff today. Really looking forward to a good Tuesday night. Danny, is there anything else you want to add before we kind of send it off for the night?
As far as game-wise, no, but I did think about something to say to end off the show this week.
I was going to say, you let us down pretty badly last time, so we need something.
It was abysmal. It was pitiful.
So what do you got? What do you got for the folks at home today before we send it off?
They say all want some, but some want all. And then they say the bigger they come, the harder they fall.
That was a bar.
Let's see if Halfway comes out on Tuesday ready to make Goliath lay down his crown.
And I saw a clip before we close it of a football coach talking about David and Goliath, saying that they won't tell you this, but after David cut Goliath's head off, he paraded around showing everybody kind of, is this your king? And I think we need to see a little bit of that energy from Halfway Crooks this week. So thank you for having a good outro for us this week. But that's going to do it for the Low Post podcast for our finals preview. We will be back after the finals to do one more Low Post pod, preview the All-Star game, have some fun, talk about the champions, talk about maybe some expectations for next season. We can only talk about the Duyes boys. but some speculations that have been going around the league, who might be going where, what our thoughts might be. But we will catch you guys next week. That's going to do it for us. And I'm going to repeat my outro. Keep your stick on the ice. Good night, everybody.